I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume, so I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. Continuing in the Doctrine and Covenants again. Oliver Cowdery and John Whitmer have already left for Missouri, taking the Revelations and the monies out there so that they can publish it in what will be called the Book of Commandments. Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon had returned to translating the Bible, but in early December 1st of 1831, they are commanded to go out and preach the word to the people in response to the letters published by the apostate Ezra Booth. During this time, we also had the calling of our second bishop, Newell K. Whitney, who will be bishop in Kirtland, but still under the authority of Bishop Partridge in Zion. That's where we left it. Now we pick it up in section 73. The heading states the following. Revelation given to Joseph Smith the prophet and Sidney Rigdon at Hiram, Ohio, January 10th, 1832. Recorded in History of the Church, Volume 1, pages 241 to 242. Since the early part of the preceding December, the prophet and Sidney Rigdon had been engaged in preaching, and by this means much was accomplished in diminishing the unfavorable feelings that had arisen against the church. Now, of course, this is in reference to the letters by Ezra Booth. In his History of the Church, Joseph Smith mentions a couple of towns. He mentions Shalersville and a Ravenna, which is where they were preaching. He says they went many other places, but these are the two he mentions by name. And Ravenna is the city in which the office for the Ohio Star newspaper was. And the Ohio Star is where Ezra Booth's letters were first published. So they're going right to the heart of the matter. They go right to where Ezra Booth is publishing, and they teach the people there. And through all this, there's a lot accomplished. It doesn't say how many people are converted, but the feelings towards the church are the negative feelings towards the church are dampened. And so there is a relief to the saints at this time. Then, on January 10th, so a little over a month after they start preaching, we get this revelation. For verily, thus saith the Lord, it is expedient in me that they should continue preaching the gospel, and in exhortation to the churches in the regions round about until conference. And then, behold, it shall be made known unto them by the voice of the conference their several missions. Now verily I say unto you, my servants, Joseph Smith Jr. and Sidney Rigdon, saith the Lord, it is expedient to translate again, and inasmuch as it is practicable, to preach in the regions round about until conference, and after that it is expedient to continue the work of translation until it be finished. And let this be a pattern unto the elders until further knowledge, even as it is written, Now I give no more unto you at this time. Gird up your loins and be sober. Even so, amen. Now this is interesting. First was, Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon are being told to start translating the Bible again, but if the opportunity presents itself, go out and preach. But focus on the translation until the next conference. Now the next conference is called for January 25th, so we got about 2 weeks to the next conference. Everybody else is being told to go out and preach the gospel. All the other elders, go out, preach. Joseph Smith and Sidney focus on the translation, but do some preaching if you can. What I find most interesting about this is that there doesn't seem to be an actual opening to there's no salutation. All the other sections, all the other revelations seem to have this opening, hearken and listen. This kind of statement, say, I'm going to start talking now, but this one starts right off, verily thus saith the Lord. That's not a beginning. It's like we're missing the first passage, and I'd like to know why. It's just an interesting thing. It just doesn't feel like the beginning of a revelation. It feels like the revelation somehow got damaged and the first part got destroyed, and instead of restoring it, they just published what was left. That's what it feels like to me. It's just very odd. But Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon do return to translating. And then we get section 74. And the heading to 74 says, Revelation given to Joseph Smith the prophet at Hiram, Ohio, January 1832. Recorded in History of the Church, Volume 1, page 242. The prophet writes, Upon the reception of the foregoing word of the Lord, meaning section 73, I recommenced the translation of the Scriptures, and labored diligently until just before the conference which was to convene on the 25th of January. During this period, I also received the following as an explanation of 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 14. There's not much else to say about this. Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon are translating the Bible. Now, at this point, I believe they are translating the New Testament. They started translating the Old Testament, but were commanded to switch to the New Testament for a time, and so I believe they're still translating the New Testament. They've come to the book of 1 Corinthians, the epistle here, and while translating it, they get this explanation for it. And we read, "For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. Now in the days of the apostles, the law of circumcision was had among all the Jews who believed not the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it came to pass that there arose a great contention among the people concerning the law of circumcision. For the unbelieving husband was desirous that his children should be circumcised and become subject to the law of Moses, which law was fulfilled. And it came to pass that the children, being brought up in subjection to the law of Moses, gave heed to the traditions of their fathers, and believed not the gospel of Christ, wherein they became unholy. Wherefore, for this cause the apostle wrote unto the church, giving unto them a commandment, not of the Lord, but of himself, that a believer should not be united to an unbeliever, except the law of Moses should be done away among them, that their children might remain without circumcision, and that the tradition might be done away, which saith that little children are unholy, for it was had among the Jews. But little children are holy, being sanctified through the atonement of Jesus Christ. And this is what the scriptures mean." In other words, a believing member should not allow an unbelieving spouse to raise their children in another faith. And, in the modern day, you're going to get a lot of complaints about this, but we marry in the covenant. Because if you marry outside the covenant, it doesn't matter. It's going to affect your children. I remember the story of the young man said he fell in love with a good Catholic girl, and he wanted to marry her, and his parents told him it's a bad idea, but they said, "Oh no, it's fine. We both have we each have our faith. We understand each other. It's fine." And it was until they had a child, and being a Catholic, she wanted to have the child baptized. Being a Latter-day Saint, the man remembered what Mormon had said about the baptism of children being an abomination to God, and it caused such a tension, such a conflict in their marriage. I honestly can't remember if they got divorced over it, but it wouldn't surprise me. And that's the same thing we have here. If you are married to somebody who wants to have your child baptized as an infant, that's not a good situation. That would be the equivalent of circumcision in the days of Christ. And so, this was written by Paul, not by God. As he says, it was written of his own advice, not given by God. But the reason he wrote it is to say, don't do this to your children. Marry in the covenant. And if at the time, if one spouse is converted and the other is not, decide now that you are going to raise your children in the gospel. Because if you don't, they will not be in the gospel. Now, I do note that this is not a translation of 1 Corinthians chapter 7. It is an explanation. So they translated it as we've read it in the Bible, and then God gave this explanation as to the meaning and the purpose of this writing. But the main purpose, as I said, is don't marry outside the covenant and insist on raising your children in the covenant. We'll just leave that there, and we pick it up in section 75 next, so I will see you there.